Welcome and thank you for standing by. Currently, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Today's webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be posted publicly. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. Now I'd like to turn the call over to your host for today, Crystal Jimerson.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on census data for the U.S., states, and counties. I'm Crystal Jimerson, a training specialist here at the U.S. Census Bureau, and I want to thank you for joining us today for the topics, tools, and data to use, strolling through the Census Bureau data webinar series. These webinars are a great opportunity for you to learn from our experts about how to access the Census Bureau data, tools, and resources. If you wish to follow along, take a moment now to open an additional browser. You can register for any of the webinars by visiting census.gov/academy. Before I introduce today's speaker, let's go over a few important housekeeping rules. As mentioned earlier, this webinar is being recorded. For your convenience, it will be uploaded to our Census Academy site with all supplemental materials relating to the webinar within 30 business days. We welcome written questions during the webinar. Please submit your questions using the Q&A panel, which is at the bottom center or the right side of your WebEx screen. Please take a moment to locate that now. Once you found the Q&A panel, make sure you choose all panelists from the drop-down menu. This will ensure we see your question. Also, we ask that you do not include any personal or business identifiable information with your questions. We suggest keeping the chat panel open as we will provide key links and other resources throughout the webinar. Keep in mind you won't be able to respond to the chat. That is for us to send out links and other resources related to the presentation. My colleagues will be monitoring the Q&A panel, and as time allows, we will answer your questions directly through the Q&A panel, or we will share your question with the presenter to respond to during the webinar. If we do not get to all of the questions with the response during the webinar, we will post the questions and responses with the webinar materials on the census.gov/academy site within 30 business days. As you know, we are in a virtual environment and sometimes technical difficulties might occur. If you are having issues, try a different browser such as Chrome or consider logging out and coming back into the session. If you are having audio issues, try selecting the computer audio or calling into the webinar via phone. Now I would like to introduce our speaker, Lacey Lofton. Thanks again for being here today. Lacey, you may begin.
Thank you, Crystal, and thank you, Lisa. Thank you guys all for having me here today, and thank you for joining us. I'm excited about this presentation because I feel like sometimes the geographies that are the basis of everything we do are often overlooked. So I'm looking forward to focusing on kind of the fundamental geographies that produce the data that we send out to the rest, to the country. They're the foundational blocks. This is me. My name is Lacey Lofton. I'm a statistician with the Census Bureau. I just started my 23rd year, which is a little, makes me feel like maybe I've been doing this a little bit too long, but I absolutely love my job. I've done lots of different things with the Census Bureau. I started out as an analyst on the economic census. I've worked in decennial operations for congressional liaison, and then I've also done Statistics in Schools launch, which was a really cool program too. In between all of those things, I've been focused on data outreach to people in the communities. Right now I focus on Texas, Arizona, Nebraska, and Utah, but I have amazing colleagues that are spread throughout the country. So if you need anything at all, we're here for you. And let me tell you about some of the services that we offer in addition to webinars like these. So our team of data dissemination specialists are spread throughout the country, and we are here to provide training to you or your organizations free of cost for anything that you need specifically. So while today's training is going to be pretty broad and pretty, just an overview, if there's something that you specifically need or if there's something that your organization would really like to focus on, we can absolutely tailor something to whatever needs you have. So we can do that. So experts can come to you either physically or virtually. Just send an email to that census.askdata@census.gov, and we can set up a time to get together either virtually or in person. There are also a lot of great resources online. Census.gov/academy has that's where this recording will be. Once we complete this, the transcript will be there as well. The PowerPoint will be there. So all the resources from today will be on census.gov/academy, but we also already have a lot stored there. So if you wake up at 2 a.m. on a Saturday and you just desperately want to know more about the American Community Survey, you can go to that website and it has it. We have webinars, we have data gems. Data gems are small snippets that really address things that we get questions about a lot. So whether it's kind of a pain point in one of the census data tools that we have, or if it's a question we get a lot about a survey, we have data tools that will cover that, data gems. And then last but not least, you can join courses like this. This is where you'll find what's coming up, and then all the recordings are stored there as well. Okay, so today, what we're going to cover, we're going to start with why geography matters. I feel like I said, I feel like this is overlooked a lot of the time, and the geography is the basis of everything we do at the Census Bureau, so we'll start there. We're going to talk about how we define large geographies, and I will be really honest with all of you, it was a struggle for me to decide exactly how to define it for the purposes of this presentation, because geographies are physically and population-wise different sizes depending on where you are. So we'll define what we're going to cover in this presentation and also talk about what won't be covered and make sure you have the resources for the things that we're not able to cover today. We're going to talk about the evolution of census data. We've been doing this for a while. Since 1790, we've been collecting and producing data based on the geographies that we're going to cover today. So we'll talk about the pros and cons and uses of that. And then we will, in detail, walk through every single geography that we produce for the nation, the state, the county, and then some of the county's subdivisions that are nationwide and cover nationwide. We'll do a live demo on census.gov. We'll walk through where you can find shapefiles if you want them. We'll walk through data.census.gov, which has a really cool mapping feature if you haven't been there recently. I'm looking forward to sharing that with all of you. And then we'll talk about the strengths and weaknesses. Everything that we produce has strengths and weaknesses, so large geographies are not immune to that. We'll talk about the best applications. Okay, why geography matters. I would be saying this even if this was not a presentation specifically on geography and the Census Bureau. The geography is literally the foundation of everything that we do. So from the point when we start going to households or finding individuals, we are looking at where they are physically located. So not only, so we start by tabulating people and being able to assign them to an area. Certainly when we produce the data as well, we need to know where those individuals are located so we can tabulate it correctly. So it is truly the basis of all of the data that we tabulate and that we produce. Without these geographies and without the public or our data users really understanding what they are and what they mean, the data isn't relevant as it should be. So it really is the basis of everything that we do. One of the core tenets of what we do is counting everyone, specifically for the decennial census, counting everyone once, only once, and in the correct place. So making sure that we have the right people in the right locations is really, again, at the core of what we do. So we'll see that through the decennial census. We'll also talk a little bit about the American Community Survey, and we'll also talk about the economic census and some of the economic surveys that we do. And again, we'll always make sure that they are assigned to a specific place on the ground. Something that is not always well known outside of the Census Bureau is that the Census Bureau maintains the boundaries for the entire United States. So we are the stewards of the boundaries, the names, and the geographic reference files. We're also in charge of geocodes. So any boundary that you're looking at, that is the official boundary for the United States government. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means while we're going through the data. But that's something that if you ever need an official delineation, an official outline, an official view of what a boundary is for the United States, we're the stewards of that, so you can come to our website for it. Okay, what is and what is not included in this presentation? I will warn you ahead of time, I will probably speak outside of the scope here, I usually do, but included in this presentation is certainly states. We're going to talk about counties and then census county divisions. We're going to talk about regions, which are aggregations of states, of states, that's right, and divisions as well. We'll talk a little bit about places just because depending on where you live, places can be absolutely massive. We'll talk about metropolitan statistical areas, and then we'll talk about congressional districts really briefly. So we're trying to focus on things that are kind of county size or associated with the county or above, but depending on where you are, it's not always easy to categorize those. What's not included in this presentation, but luckily I have colleagues that are covering these topics for me. We're not going to be talking about census tracts, census block groups, or blocks. We won't be talking about zip codes or zip code tabulation areas. We won't be specifically focused on Puerto Rico and the outlying areas, although we will talk about geographies that relate to those. We will not cover tribal areas, and we won't have time to cover voting districts. Okay, the very first census in 1790, for the record, my colleagues who are on the call with me today and I were not technically there, but we had colleagues that were. And the Census Bureau is really good at keeping records. So I'm going to walk you through kind of how this whole process evolved. And I should start by saying that before 1790, there were multiple, actually dozens of enumerations of the colonies before we became what is now known as the United States. So 1790 was the first decennial census. It is something that is mandated in the Constitution, something that we are required to do every 10 years. But there are a lot of other surveys that were happening before the 1790 census, and there are certainly now even more and more operations that are going on constantly to produce data. So we have data before, during, and after. The states, we were lucky from a statistical standpoint that with the Declaration of Independence, each colony, each state had signed off and defined what they were. So we started with those definitions as they were at the time. So in 1790, we did an enumeration of the first 13 states as they were at the time. And we have just gradually moved forward as the geographies have changed since then. States and then counties are the primary geographic unit for every single thing that we do. So we start with those, and then we build on top of those. Luckily with computers, our jobs have gotten easier, right? So it used to be really hard for us to just get through producing data for the states, which is congressionally mandated so that we can distribute the seats among the House of Representatives among the states. But now with computers, we're much faster. So we're constantly adding on to what we can produce, what geographies we can produce for. But the very primary geographic unit is the states and then the counties within those states. Okay, so first decennial census, 1790. It was mostly U.S. Marshals riding around on really pretty horses, at least that's how we've rewritten it in our head. And they were basically going door to door and getting information about people that were living within what was the United States at the time. So the decennial census, while it has certainly evolved and expanded, at its core, it has remained the same over the last couple hundred years. So the first thing that we do is we identify places that people live or that they could live, and then we enumerate those places. And the most important part of that entire process is that we geocode it now. we can assign it to a specific space of land on the ground. So we can tell, like, if we go to somebody and we enumerate them, but we can't tell you where they are, it defeats the entire purpose. So again, going back to the geography as the core is really important here. States were created originally by the Declaration of Independence, but then, since then, mostly it's been expansion westward. There are a couple of examples there, a couple of exceptions there. I actually learned this today. Apparently, Maine came out of Massachusetts, and then West Virginia was originally part of Virginia and going forward was not anymore. So there still have been a couple changes since the original 13 states in the first census. The other thing I will say is we've gotten more accurate in our GIS boundaries. So sometimes, there were definitions that were vague and they were hard to see on the ground. Now they're not anymore. We've got much better technology to do so. So while in theory some of those boundaries could have changed going forward, we've got them nailed down. By 1870, most of the boundaries were fixed within the United States. Again, there's a couple of exceptions to every rule. I could spend the next 7 or 8 hours talking about all those exceptions. We just don't have time for it. But most of the boundaries within the continental U.S. Were set by 1870. And then by 1900, all of the states were static. So there haven't been any major changes. As I'm sure many of you on this call know, depending on certain, natural movements of land and natural disasters, the land can change. But usually the population does not change significantly with those at kind of the state and the county level. So especially going forward, we expect that the counties and the states are reliable and they are stagnant. And one of the most important things about the states and then the counties that nest within them is that there are no gaps and there are no overlaps. I know that my colleagues on the phone have heard me say this entirely too much, but it's a really big deal. So we have a geography, a net of geographical entities that cover the entire United States, and wherever you are at a given point in time, you're only in one, and you're always in one. So there's never a place that we're going to talk about today, at least, that you are not within a statistical or administrative entity that we are collecting data for. And then you're also never there's no overlap. So it's not like you're, in Kansas City, Missouri and Kansas City, Kansas. We're really good at delineating those so that we can produce data where we're counting people once, only once, and always in the right place. Okay, origins of England. So the counties basically came over to the colonies originally as a administrative concept from the English. And that's what they were doing there. When they came over, that's what they were doing here too. And it's just basically a sub-state structure that helps administer whatever needs to be administered, right? And that has changed dramatically over the last couple of centuries. I don't act like I would know exactly how that played out in the 1790s, but these were administrative districts that then became static and are now something that we base everything else that we do based on those. So those counties are based on whatever the state constitution requires them to be. So there can be incorporations, there can be changes. Where I physically live, there's a kind of a disagreement between the counties. I'm close to the county line on exactly where that county line should or is supposed to be. At the end of the day, for the Census Bureau, we ingest the boundaries as they are given to us by law. So the state is the one that tells us, okay, this is where the boundary should be. It's based on precedent, it's based on law, or it's based on administrative action. So just for your information, they are different state to state, which can, actually affect things in a lot of ways, but they are administered within the state. And generally, the reason that they exist is that there's a division of the state, so these counties have some type of specific responsibility, whether it is distribution of funds, whether it is collection of funds, whether it is a service that they are providing to the individuals that live there. They exist for a specific reason and a specific responsibility that has been delegated by the states. At this point, the county boundaries specifically are pretty stable. There are still changes that still happen for different reasons. There was, every now and then, I think it was Las Vegas or outside of Nevada, that there was a county that was introduced and then it was overruled by the state's Supreme Court, so it came and went. There still are some changes, but in general, they are relatively stable. So if you're looking at the boundaries as they are now, going back to 1900, certainly the state boundaries are solid, and basically to 1950, you should be able to assume that these county boundaries are comparable over time. Again, no gaps and no overlaps. The counties nest completely within the states. and the states nest completely within the United States. County subdivisions are a really complicated geography, and I spent a lot of time trying to consolidate this, and I will find out today if I was successful. Depending on where you live, if we can see the map that we're looking at here, the white areas of the map have minor civil divisions. The grayish areas of the map have census county divisions. And I'll tell you a little bit about how it evolved over time. So starting with the colonies and starting with places that had kind of major urban areas and major urban populations, they produce these minor civil divisions, which can come by a lot of different names. It can be considered a town. It can be not considered, it can actually be a town. Sorry about that. It can be a city. It can be a village, but it's something that is within the county that is an administrative district for whatever reason. With westward expansion, there were different reasons for the governments to function in the ways that they were. So I'm just going to put that statement out there and then circle back to it soon. But basically, minor civil divisions were the original sub-county government types on the East Coast, and then in a lot of ways they were able to migrate across the country, and we'll talk about where that didn't quite work. And basically where it didn't quite work is the states that you see highlighted in gray. They usually had a very specific administrative purpose or function. In a lot of places, these minor civil divisions are the main governing body within an area. For just common vernacular, and this will be something that comes up throughout this conversation, is the government or the Census Bureau may call it one thing and you may be used to hearing it another way, and that's just part of the deal. So you may hear about minor civil divisions. If you live on the East Coast, you probably know exactly where you are and what minor civil division you're in. If not, townships are often minor civil divisions, as well as incorporated places. That can be cities, that can be villages. Towns are also there. We also have election precincts and then magisterial districts, depending on where you physically are. Right now, the minor civil divisions are used in 29 states. I rounded up a little bit because Alaska loves to be unique, and I am so looking forward to going there and seeing all of these unique things in person. But they have a slightly different definition, but I went ahead and put them in with minor civil divisions. So 29 of the states have minor civil divisions that cover them. And again, no gaps and overlaps. It goes wall to wall for each of the states. So I think it was 1950, and an hour ago, I completely knew for sure what decade it was. But during the post-World War II, there was a shift. So for a lot of the states that you'll see here highlighted in gray, they were more farming focused. They were more rural. They were not as centered around a population base. And so when we were looking for county subdivisions, it was harder to define because they didn't have a need to define them as specifically or as directly. So the Census Bureau came in and attempted to make minor civil divisions in these areas. But then they kept changing because they weren't, again, producing a specific function, doing something that was really concrete. So starting in the 1950s, we started, I think it was the 1950s, we started having conversations with the states and saying, hey, this geography might not be working for you. Can we do something that is more stable, that is more comparable over time, that won't change in name, won't change in boundary, won't change in definition? And for the states that agreed, we worked collaboratively with the states and different entities and local governments within those states to define these, and actually within the counties, to define these boundaries. And we call them county subdivisions, census county subdivisions. So they are more stable, the names are more stable, and therefore from a data user perspective, they are finally now similar to NCDs that we talked about just moments ago, because now we have national coverage of this type of sub-county geography. All right, up next is places. We at the Census Bureau love to come up with fun names for geographies that just keep you on your toes. We have places are what you think of as probably cities or villages or towns. They are legally incorporated, so that means that there is usually like a mayor, or there's some type of actual administrative duty that they're required to do. Places do not cross state lines because they are incorporated based on state laws and state requirements, and they do not overlap. So we'll talk about that when we go into the live demo here about how these entities are, but basically there's no overlaps. There can be lots of gaps though. So not every place in the country is incorporated, not by a long shot. Most of these have elected officials, most raise revenue, most perform, general purpose government types of functions. There are some exceptions to that, but the further you get into this, there's exceptions to everything, so that's kind of an overview. I'm about to click on this next slide and realizing it did not save with what I added to it, so I apologize ahead of time. Census designated places. They are created by the U.S. Census Bureau, but I had more thoughts, so let me just freehand it here. There are a lot of places across the country that have the feel of a city or a township. There's not actually like a mayor. There's not actually a functioning government there. And so it's not less relevant to have data for that area. And so the Census Bureau has come in, I think it was early 1900s where we started making these census designated places. And there are a lot of great examples across the country. Notre Dame's the one I chose because I felt like that's kind of an easy one that people recognize. It is not specifically a place. It does not have a mayor. It does not have a governing body, but it's definitely an area that people understand, and having data for it would be useful. It is almost completely surrounded by South Bend. And so the Census Bureau basically came in and said, hey, there's no government here. Local governments we don't usually proactively do this. So the local governments have said, hey, we'd love to have data for this, but it doesn't fit an actual legal entity. Can we make this a census designated place? And we did so. So in theory, a census designated place is supposed to have the feel of a city or a village or a town. Usually the name is kind of known within the community. This can be a major residential area that is just the builder or the, I'm trying to think of the right terminology here, but it's basically a subdivision where there's a construction area that is known by some certain name. It's got a feel of community. And then we'll come in and we'll designate the census designated place, even though it's not actually technically incorporated. Nationwide, I'm going to stumble a little bit on my statistics here, but statistically, we have many fewer census designated places than we do actually incorporated places. I want to say it's around 30%. I will find out for sure and make sure I get that to you guys before I produce this for transcription and for the final documents. But it's a lower percentage, but it's where we're trying to produce data that is useful to the people that live in a community, even if they're not technically within an incorporated area. Metropolitan statistical areas are an aggregate of counties that really better describe the economic and social situation on the ground than an individual place or an individual county could. This is where I grew up. So we are, thank goodness I moved around a lot, because most of these examples are from somewhere that I lived at some point in time. But we're looking at metropolitan statistical areas here. Just looking specifically at Chicago might not always give you the data that you want or the data that you need, right? Because there's a much bigger economic footprint that comes into and out of Chicago. So the metropolitan statistical areas are technically created by the Office of Management and Budget, but it's based on Census Bureau data. So we'll have a decennial census, and we'll be able to say, this is where people live, this is where people are coming from and going to for work. We're able to do that through the American Community Survey now. And then these metropolitan statistical areas are built based on that information. So just some really basic overviews. The core of the metropolitan statistical area needs to have 50,000 people. Then you bring in adjacent counties, and that has to have 100,000 people combined. Then we'll name it. And it's named based on the biggest 3 kind of hubs within that area. And then you can't see it on this picture, but you'll see it when we go to it live on our website. It ends with the states that it covers as well, because these often do cover more than one state. So this is the basically economic region around Chicago, Naperville, and Elgin. And so it's just a different way of looking at the data that may give you more information if you're choosing a geography first. Do you want to be looking at Chicago? Do you want to be looking at Naperville? Do you want to be looking at Elgin? Or do you want to be looking at the entire economic region around it? And that's the purpose of metropolitan statistical areas. The boundary annexation survey is how we keep up with all of this. And I have more and more appreciation for it the longer I've been doing this job. So every year now, again, because we have computers, so we can send you something and ask for information, and then we can update our information to reflect what you told us. Every single year, we will send out the boundary annexation survey to all functional governments, which hopefully somebody's giggling to themselves, usually in a classroom setting. I get some giggles on that. What is a functional government? A functional government is something that has an official and then is producing some type of product, for lack of a better term, for the area that it governs. Within the boundary annexation survey, we asked every single functional government, do you have any incorporations? So have you brought in any physical geography? Are there areas that you have disincorporated? I've learned that there are a lot of places that you can disincorporate for different reasons. Have there been any mergers? Are there any annexations, detachments? And then there's some nuances here. So if your entity changes effectively a county, we will take that as well so that we can change the county boundaries. And then certainly name changes and corporate status changes are important to us too. So a name change would be if you decided to call your city something else, we would change it through this survey. And then corporate status changes are it would be state-based, but be like, okay, if this is no longer the definition of a city and we used to call it a city and now it's called a village. So that's how we would capture the information about the corporate status change. Okay, I think we've only got 2 more definitions types of things here, so bear with me. Congressional districts are a big deal, right? And the decennial census, the Census Bureau was basically created, and the decennial census is conducted in large part to be able to produce the number of seats that should be apportioned amongst the states. We do not have anything to do with the actual delineation of congressional districts, but we do produce the data that then creates those congressional districts. Once they're approved by the states, we ingest them, and then going forward, we'll produce data for those individual congressional districts. We also do that for state legislative districts. I don't go too deep in here because just state legislative districts are so different state to state. So it's just too hard to have a conversation that covers all of the states and all the territories. But basically, legislative districts, we will ingest those boundaries and we will produce data for them according to the boundaries that we received. I include the school districts, and this one was a little bit, I didn't know if I should or not, because depending on where you live, school districts can be really big or they can be really small, right? But school districts are a data geography that I feel like a lot of people don't know about, so I wanted to include it. I have talked to too many people who have spent so much time trying to fit a block group or a tract or block into a school district boundary as they know it, because it's just not well known that we actually produce that data already. So wherever you are, there are different ways that we produce data for school districts. If you are in a unified school district, we will produce it for those boundaries. We have a program that collects the boundaries every single year, so we can update those. We also have, depending, however your school districts are produced and maintained, we will ingest those boundaries and we'll produce the exact same data for those boundaries that we do for everything else. So I guess my pitch and my point here is, please don't waste your time trying to build your own kind of piecemeal Lego, definition of your school district. We already have the boundaries and we're producing data for you. Okay, with that, I am going to jump into a live demonstration, but in the meantime, Crystal, Lisa, Kim, is there any question that's come up enough that we should address it now?
So Lacey, if you could explain how CDPs become a geography.
Ooh, I like that one. Okay, so the question was, how do census designated places basically become a place? So Notre Dame was the example we used here, and I'm going to use, actually, Kim, you know what? I'm going to go first into a census designated place in Texas that'll help illustrate this. There are multiple ways that it can happen. So there's not a formal government, but for whatever reason, either the county government or the state government feels that understanding the information about this specific area would be really useful. And it's kind of a hub of population, and it has a feel of location, and that's a big deal too. So it's not just, a bunch of people living together. It's a bunch of people living together that have a feel of a community, have a feel of a city. They'll come to the Census Bureau. Actually, we'll probably come to you and ask you if there's anywhere that this applies. And you'll say, yes, I would love to have data for this area called Notre Dame, and we will work with you to draw a boundary around it. And once that boundary is established, we will designate it as a census designated place. And going forward, we'll produce data for it just like we would for any other incorporated entity. So we don't treat census designated places as anything different than we do every single incorporated government around the country.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And I'm going to kind of generalize this next question because it's, I think, a summary of a lot of questions that are coming up. So how do we account for, at the Census Bureau, a scale for creating the different geographies? Is there like how do we reconcile the differences between, like, perhaps a metropolitan and a micropolitan, a city versus a town, thresholds?
That's a fun question. So depending on the different geography that you're talking about, they have different requirements and they have different limitations. What I would say, I'm assuming, and I might be wrong here, that the question is going in the direction of, I need this area to be enumerated. If there is a space or an area that you need to be enumerated, reach out to us, please, and we will do our very best to make sure that fits within some type of criteria. There are limits and there are requirements for each of the different criteria, but luckily we've been doing this for a while and we've figured out how to make something usually fit in with that the criteria that we have. Kim, is that what you meant? Like, it's like, how do we define those, and how do we get something to?
Yeah, that does. So I think it's along that concept, like those thresholds, like when an area loses population, can it does it lose maybe its status as a metropolitan or a place level or a city? Or when does it become a city, when it gains a certain number of people, things like that?
So I am going to send out the most it's one of my favorite documents. It's sitting right here. Geographic Area Reference Manual. Depending on where you are physically, so depending on what state you're in, places have different thresholds. So I can't speak specifically to the thresholds for each city within the United States, but there are thresholds. So I'm sure that if you fall below some thresholds, you would no longer, I don't actually know how that would happen with the disincorporation, but my point is there are definitely thresholds for each of these geographies, and I would assume that if you cross the upper boundary, you do get to be called an MSA. If you fall below that number, I would assume it's possible that that changes the other direction. But I will get you a very technical, very specific answer. I like the question.
Yeah, that's a great one. And actually what I'll do for everybody is I'll put in the chat the link for the reference for geography definitions. And I think that'll answer a lot of questions for people because that comes up quite a bit. So
it does. And it's actually fun probably for you and me, maybe not the whole human public, but like the list of requirements state by state of like what is considered a village and what is considered a city and what is considered a town is absolutely fascinating. And so we'll get that out to the group too.
Yeah, because it does change for everybody, but that is coming up quite a bit about what defines a city versus a town and so on. And
it depends on where you live. So we will get that information to you.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. And one last question I have for you is, when would you use county level data when we have all of these other great geographies?
That's a great question. And thank you for the segue. One of the places that there's multiple places that county level and state level data is either your only option or your best option. And one of those situations is if you're talking to normal human beings who aren't digging down in this type of data every single day. So if you're just talking to a person who is planning for, a market analysis or doing a grant question, things along those lines, counties and states are things that are easily recognizable by the, normal human public. So a lot of times sticking to that is your best bet. Also, if you're looking at economic data, and I don't mean like the American Community Survey, we do have some economic data that comes from that survey. But if you're looking at like economic level data for the country, we don't produce that on a level lower than counties. And in a lot of cases, we can't even do it that low because we can never risk identifying either a specific person or a business. So we have to make sure that we have a big enough sample and a big enough area to, facilitate that we are producing on these larger scales. So for economic data, sometimes you have to stick to counties and states. And then a lot of times if you're just talking to a normal person who wants to understand where they live and what's happening in their area, sticking to very identifiable things like states and counties are your best bet.
All right. Thanks, Lacey.
What else? I'm ready.
Let's see if I can come up with some more specific questions.
I can go live and you can come up with more questions as we go. I know there's a lot.
That would
I keep
be great.
seeing the bounce
Yep,
up.
I'll give
Okay,
you...
good deal. Okay, perfect. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen now, which is data.census.gov. Can I get a yes from somebody? Is that still working? Hopefully.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, okay, good deal. Thank you. Okay, so for those of you that have not been on data.census.gov in a while, there's a lot of cool new bells and whistles. And again, I know I'm biased, but there's just a lot of functionality that is built in now that is really useful. And it's a product that certainly I use every day. It's a platform that my colleagues and I use all the time, and it's really user-friendly now. So if it's been a minute, if you were here 5 years ago and didn't love it, please come back to us. I think that you'll be surprised and hopefully delighted by what the functionality is now. I'm going to start with something really basic, but unfortunately it's kind of like hidden. This adorable little "you are here" symbol is how you now, and this is new, this is like very recent, is how you enter where you physically are, and it will then tell you every single geography that you fall within. So I'm going to use my parents' old address. This is where I went to high school, and it's funny because my mother was complaining about traffic, and I was kind of laughing, thinking that's so silly. And then I typed in their address one time for a presentation, and she was absolutely right. The traffic there is absolutely terrible. So, 7606. Austin, Texas. And then they were in. As soon as you click on search, if there is any geography, if we're able to identify where you physically are, we will tell you every single geography that you fall within. And this is a great place to start. One of the questions I get a lot is like, what geography do I want? Because that is kind of the starting point of the whole process. And it's not always an easy question, even for us. I've been doing this for a very long time. So I love this tool. It'll tell you exactly where you are. So right now, I'm just north of where they were, but I'm still almost where they are. So they're in the state of Texas. The county is Travis County. Specifically, the county subdivision is Northwest Travis County. This is your census block. This is what David's going to get into for the presentation that's about 3 weeks from now. Blocks, census tracts, and then block groups. Within the city of Austin, the urban area, congressional district, state legislative district, I mean, it just goes on and on, right? What's nice about this too is it sounds silly. Every now and then I have like a normal human friend just asking me like, do you know what like state legislative district we're in? I'm like, oh, I have a lookup for that. So this will tell you every single place that a physical location falls within. And it's a great place for you to just go and be like, all right, let's start looking around and seeing what might be most applicable to whatever I'm trying to understand more. So I'm going to click on the county subdivisions. We just spoke about it. And whenever you choose a geography, and I'm going to go back and show you another way to choose that geography as well, it's going to automatically take you to the all, and then the tables here, which have data tables for Northwest Travis County. I'm going to focus on the maps. So we're going to just look at the maps because I doubt that most of you, and I'm included in the most of us conversation, I don't actually know what the outline is for the subdivision. So this is Northwest Travis County county subdivision. And this will actually tell you not only what's here, but like where it is and how it's compared to other places. So that's a really great starting point for a lot of things. Then if you go back to the results right here, at the very top will always be the most chosen data points that we have from our data products. So I'll just show you quickly how this works. If you click on demographic information, if you go back to tables, it will show you the tables. It'll tell you exactly who lives within this geography. Scrolling across, it'll tell you about the population, but you can choose any of these to populate the map. And then my favorite part is about this new fancy mapping system that we have is clicking right here. And this is actually something I get so many calls about is where was that drop-down menu? It's right here. So every single thing that is on this table is also in this drop-down menu. So if you've been doing the great but hard work of downloading a data set and then uploading it into some type of GIS, you don't have to do that for any of these data tables and data points that we produce. So you can click on whatever it is, you can highlight more areas if you want to, and it will automatically change the table to reflect that. Let me go back to the very beginning here to, if you click on the United States Census Bureau, it'll take you back to the beginning. If you click on advanced search, I love that I'm giving a geography presentation because it means I don't have to justify that the geography is the first thing you should, and we're kind of going to ask you to choose before you get further into your search. So as far as geographies go, here's your list, and this is a really cute and quaint list. It seems so compact and so just understated. If you click on all geographies, it is a whole different animal. So you will have there's a really, really long list that comes with this. I'm going to stick in this area right now just for the purposes of this conversation. And there's a couple things. I'm actually talking longer than I expected, so I want to make sure I cover places with everyone, and I want to make sure that I cover counties as it applies to economic data. So I'm going to go to places. Again, this is just our very government speak term for things like villages, towns, cities, and I'm going to go down to Texas, which is where I physically am located right now. And Houston is just a wealth of specific case studies, whether it wants to be or not. It is absolutely fascinating. So I'm going to type in Houston. It'll come up as Houston City. Since we're here, I want to point out really quickly the way that we denote each of these geographies. So Houston City, city in this context is the entity that was created by the state for this particular incorporated place. So you'll see Houston City. Sometimes you'll see Glenview Township. You'll see different, depending on the terminology, you'll see that second word and then the state afterwards. I'm going to click on Houston City. It's going to just make us wait because why wouldn't it? And then we're going to go to maps. I'm going to minimize this. All right, so we're going to zoom in here. And I think this is a really noteworthy example of how each place differs based on the state's requirements to create a place. In Texas, it does not have to be contiguous. So you see these, we call them donut holes, but I don't think any self-respecting person would eat a donut with that kind of shape in the middle of it. And there's got all these different areas that just, you know, going out of the area, they're just kind of piecemealed. You'll see in some areas that there's just kind of something following a interstate highway, things along those lines, but this is a non-contiguous city that is sprawling. I'm going to add to this, let me go up a little bit, the Woodlands. So the Woodlands is a census designated place. When you click on it, you can tell it's a census designated place because we put it right after. What's important about the difference between a city, Houston's a city, and the Woodlands, which is a census designated place, is that they can never overlap. And so if the city of Houston boundaries change to come into an area where the Woodlands are, we will automatically change our boundaries in order to reflect that. And then I think what's important to note too is for something like this, when you're looking at Houston, the city boundaries may or may not describe or encompass what you're trying to study. Houston has an MSA, which covers the economic area. Houston also is obviously within a county that might better describe the area that you're trying to study. So I think I just want to drive that home in the last few minutes of this presentation is, you know, these big geographies, they are unique, they are different, they are important, and just know what you're looking at, know what you want from a search, know what you want from data, look at the map to make sure that, you know, what you want to see and what you want to understand is reflected physically in the map that you're looking at. And if it's not, then change tax. So if this does not, if you're studying Houston and this is not what you want, then maybe look at Harris County. If it's not what you want, even within Harris County, then look at the metropolitan statistical area, which will encompass multiple counties. With these big geographies, with these foundational geographies, you just have a lot of flexibility and a lot of consistency, and honestly, the sky's the limit. And I am within 4 minutes of overdoing this, so I'm going to zip it and ask for more questions. Kim, I thought I was going to, you know, struggle to fill the space, but here I am talking entirely too much again.
No, you did great. Thanks. We had an enormous amount of interest and questions. This was fantastic. Thanks so much, Lacey. And you're correct. We're way over time, and I apologize
Yes.
for those that we didn't get your questions answered. We will gather those and put them in the posting when the video
Absolutely.
is available on Census Academy, and I'll turn this back over to our host, Crystal. Thanks, Lacey.
Thank you, guys.
Hello. Yes. Thank you, Lacey. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, everyone who's on the call. And yes, as stated, we will have these questions and responses posted to our Census Academy site. Again, thank you, Lacey, for this geography overview, this like generous deep dive into our geographies. Before we conclude, I would like to thank everyone who played a role in today's webinar, our audience for spending your time with us. We are interested in hearing from you on how we were doing. So please take a moment to fill out the evaluation that will appear when you exit the webinar. This does bring us to a close. Again, we thank you for joining us and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everybody.